The sun was setting over Pine Grove when Marcus Johnson finished his shift at the local library. At 17, he was tall for his age, with a warm smile that made everyone feel at ease. His mother had always taught him that kindness costs nothing, a lesson he carried close to his heart, especially on days like this when the summer heat made everyone a little irritable. Marcus had just stepped out of the library, adjusting his backpack when he heard a small sound, something between a sniffle and a frustrated sigh. His eyes scanned the area until they landed on a young boy, probably no more than 10 years old, crouching beside a blue bicycle near the convenience store across the street. The scene caught his attention because it reminded him of himself at that age, when his own bicycle had been his most prized possession. Marcus checked his watch. 5:45 p.m. He still had time before dinner, and something told him he should check on the boy. As he crossed the street, Marcus could see the problem more clearly. The bicycle chain had completely derailed, and the young boy was fighting back tears as he tried unsuccessfully to fix it. His small hands were already covered in grease, and his bottom lip trembled slightly. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle the child. "Looks like you're having some trouble with that chain." The boy looked up, quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I can't get it back on," he admitted, his voice quiet and frustrated. "I'm supposed to be home by 6, and my dad." He trailed off, looking worried. "I'm Marcus," he introduced himself, kneeling down beside the bike. "What's your name?" Tommy Wilson," the boy responded, watching as Marcus examined the bicycle. Marcus smiled reassuringly. "Well, Tommy, you're in luck. I know a thing or two about fixing bikes. Would you like some help?" Tommy's face lit up with hope. "Really? You can fix it?" "Sure can. I've fixed this same problem on my bike dozens of times," Marcus said, already reaching for the chain. "Want to learn how to do it yourself? That way, if it happens again, you'll know exactly what to do." Tommy nodded eagerly, moving closer to watch as Marcus began explaining the process. The older teen took his time, showing Tommy how the chain should properly align with the gears and explaining why it sometimes slips off. "See these teeth here?" Marcus pointed to the gear system. "The chain needs to sit just right on them. When it doesn't, that's when you get problems like this." As they worked together, Tommy began to relax, asking questions and even laughing when Marcus told him about the time he'd gotten his own pants caught in a bicycle chain. The convenience store owner, Mr. Patel, came out to sweep the sidewalk, smiling at the scene of the two boys working on the bike. "You're good with mechanics," Mr. Patel observed, posing in his sweeping. "Just like your father, Marcus." Marcus beamed at the compliment. His father, a mechanic at the local auto shop, had taught him everything he knew about fixing things. "Thanks, Mr. Patel, just helping Tommy here get back on the road." The sun was casting long shadows across the parking lot as they worked, and a few cars pulled in and out of the convenience store. Marcus noticed a dark blue sedan that had been parked there for a while, but he was too focused on the task at hand to pay it much attention. "Almost done," Marcus assured Tommy, who was checking his watch nervously. "Just need to make sure it's secure. Try turning the pedals slowly." Tommy did as instructed, and the chain moved smoothly around the gears. His face broke into a huge smile. "It works." "Good as new," Marcus agreed, standing up and wiping his hands on his jeans. "Now remember what I showed you about keeping it oiled and checking the tension." Tommy nodded enthusiastically, clearly proud of what he'd learned. "Thank you so much, Marcus. I was so worried about being late, and now—" But Tommy never finished his sentence. A car door slammed suddenly, making both boys jump. Heavy footsteps approached rapidly from behind them, and the atmosphere shifted instantly from peaceful to tense. Neither of them was prepared for what happened next. The sound of angry footsteps grew louder as Richard Wilson, Tommy's father, stormed toward them. His face was red with fury, and his fists were clenched at his sides. Marcus stood slowly, instinctively stepping slightly in front of Tommy, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to protect the boy. "Get away from my son's bike," Richard shouted, his voice cutting through the peaceful evening air. Several customers entering the convenience store stopped to watch the scene unfold. Mr. Patel, who was still sweeping nearby, gripped his broom tighter. Tommy quickly tried to explain. "Dad, no. He was helping me fix." "Shut up, Tommy," Richard snapped, causing his son to flinch. He turned his attention back to Marcus, his eyes filled with suspicion and prejudice. I've been watching you from my car. What do you think you're doing with my son's property? Marcus kept his voice steady, just as his parents had taught him to do in difficult situations. Sir, your son's bike chain was broken. I was just showing him how to fix it. His hands were still dirty from working on the chain, and he held them up to show the grease marks. But Richard Wilson wasn't interested in explanations. He grabbed Tommy's arm roughly, pulling him away from Marcus. Like I'm supposed to believe that? A teenager hanging around, messing with a kid's bike. I know exactly what you were trying to do. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but he remembered his mother's words about staying dignified in the face of ignorance. He took a deep breath and tried again. Mr. Wilson, I work at the library right across the street. I was just heading home when I saw Tommy having trouble. Asked Mr. Patel. He watched me help fix the chain. Mr. Patel stepped forward, his voice firm. He's telling the truth, sir. Marcus is a good boy. Hey. Stay out of this, Richard barked, cutting him off. He pulled out his phone with his free hand, still gripping Tommy with the other. I'm calling the police. Let them sort this out. Tommy was crying now, trying to pull away from his father's grip. Dad, please. Marcus really was helping me. The chain broke, and I was going to be late, and he showed me how to fix it. He didn't do anything wrong. A small crowd had gathered by this point. Among them was Mrs. Rodriguez, a regular at the library where Marcus worked. She had been recording the entire interaction on her phone since Richard first approached. She stepped forward now, her phone still recording. I have the whole thing on video, she announced, her voice clear and confident. This young man spent the last 15 minutes teaching your son how to repair his bicycle chain. If you call the police, I'll be happy to show them exactly what happened. Richard faltered for a moment, his phone still in his hand. He looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, then at the other witnesses who were nodding in agreement. The hatred in his eyes didn't diminish, but uncertainty crept into his expression. Marcus remained calm, though his heart was racing. He looked at Tommy, who was still trying to break free from his father's grip, tears streaming down his face. The boy's eyes met Marcus's, filled with a mixture of fear and apology. The chain's fixed now, Marcus said quietly, addressing Tommy rather than his father. Remember what I showed you about maintaining it? Tommy nodded, managing a small smile despite his tears. Thank you, Marcus, he whispered. Richard's face twisted with anger and embarrassment. He roughly pulled Tommy toward their car, muttering under his breath. The racial slur he used wasn't quite quiet enough, and several gasps rose from the onlookers. As father and son retreated to their car, Mrs. Rodriguez approached Marcus, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Are you okay, honey? She asked, her voice full of concern. Marcus nodded, but his hands were shaking slightly. He watched as Richard's car peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the asphalt. The peaceful evening had turned into something ugly, but it wasn't over yet. Unknown to Marcus, this incident would spark something much bigger in their small community. The next morning, Marcus tried to go about his day as usual, but the events from the previous evening weighed heavily on his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about Tommy's tearful face and the hatred he'd seen in Mr. Wilson's eyes. During breakfast, his mother noticed something was wrong. You're pushing those eggs around your plate like they've offended you, Sarah Johnson said, sitting down across from her son. Want to talk about it? Marcus sighed and told her everything. As he spoke, his mother's expression shifted from concern to anger to sadness. When he finished, she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You did the right thing, helping that boy, she said firmly. Don't let anyone's ignorance dim your light. Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification, then another, and another. He pulled it out to find dozens of messages from friends and classmates. Mrs. Rodriguez's video had gone viral overnight, spreading across local social media groups and eventually reaching the wider internet. Oh my God, Marcus whispered, scrolling through the comments. People were praising his patience and composure in the face of Richard Wilson's racist outburst. Many shared their own stories of encountering similar prejudice in their community. His father, James, who had been quietly listening while reading the morning paper, spoke up. Son, sometimes the hardest moments in life become opportunities for change. How do you want to handle this? Before Marcus could answer, his phone rang. It was Mr. Harrison, his principal at Pine Grove High School. Marcus, I've seen the video, he said when Marcus answered. I want you to know the school stands behind you completely, and I have an idea I'd like to discuss with you. During their conversation, Mr. Harrison proposed something unexpected. The school had an unused workshop space, and he suggested Marcus could use it to start a bicycle repair program for younger students. You clearly have a gift for teaching, the principal said. Why not turn this incident into something positive? As Marcus walked to school that morning, several cars honked in support. People he'd never met waved and called out encouragement. Outside the school gates, local news vans were parked, reporters ready with their microphones. Marcus tried to slip past them, but Miss Chen from Channel 5 News caught up to him. Marcus, can we get your statement about last night's incident? He paused, remembering his father's words about opportunities for change. Taking a deep breath, he faced the camera. What happened yesterday wasn't just about me or Tommy, he said carefully. It's about the assumptions people make and the lessons we teach our children. I'd rather focus on what we can do to make things better. That's why I'm starting a free bicycle repair workshop at school to help build bridges in our community. The announcement of the workshop immediately caught the reporter's attention, shifting the narrative from one of conflict to one of hope and positive action. As Marcus walked through the school hallways, students and teachers alike stopped to show their support. During lunch break, Marcus received an unexpected message on social media. It was from Tommy, sent secretly from his tablet. I'm sorry about my dad. Thank you for helping me. Can I come to your workshop when it starts? Marcus smiled as he typed his reply. Of course you can, Tommy. Everyone's welcome. But as he hit send, Marcus couldn't help wondering how Richard Wilson would react when he found out. The workshop could either become a source of healing or create more tension in their small town. Either way, Marcus knew he had to try. By the end of the school day, over 50 students had already signed up to help with the workshop. The local bike shop owner called to offer tools and spare parts. Even Mr. Patel from the convenience store promised to provide snacks for the participants. What had started as an act of simple kindness was transforming into something much bigger. As Marcus walked home that afternoon, he realized that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the most unexpected opportunities for change. The real question was, how would Richard Wilson respond when he discovered his son wanted to be part of it? 2 weeks had passed since the incident, and Marcus's bicycle repair workshop was set to open that Saturday. The school's old workshop had been transformed, with donated tools neatly arranged on pegboards and spare parts organized in labeled bins. Posters announcing free bicycle repair lessons. Everyone welcome hung throughout the neighborhood. On Friday afternoon, Marcus was doing a final inventory when he heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he found Mrs. Wilson, Tommy's mother, standing in the doorway. She looked nervous, twisting her purse strap between her fingers. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said softly. Tommy told me about the workshop. He really wants to come tomorrow. Marcus nodded, careful to keep his expression neutral. He's absolutely welcome to join us. Mrs. Wilson's eyes filled with tears. My husband doesn't know I'm here. What happened that day? I've been ashamed ever since I saw the video. Richard, she paused, collecting herself. He wasn't always like this. Losing his job at the factory last year changed him. That's no excuse. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Tommy drew this. He's been too scared to bring it himself. She handed it to Marcus. The drawing showed 2 stick figures working on a bicycle. One was clearly meant to be Marcus, labeled my hero in childish handwriting. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. I'll drive Tommy to the workshop myself tomorrow, Mrs. Wilson said firmly. Richard will be at his new job interview. Tommy deserves better than to inherit his father's hatred. After she left, Marcus sat looking at the drawing for a long time. Later that evening, as he shared it with his parents over dinner, his father offered some wisdom. Sometimes people's hearts change one small step at a time, James Johnson said. Mrs. Wilson taking that first step might seem small, but it's significant. The next morning, Marcus arrived early to set up. Volunteers from school were already there, including his best friend David and several teachers who'd offered to help. Local news crews set up their cameras, wanting to document the workshop's opening day. At exactly 9 a.m., kids started arriving with their bikes. Some came with parents, others with siblings or friends. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he prepared to address the group. Then he saw Tommy slip in quietly with his mother. The boy's face lit up when he spotted Marcus, but he stayed close to Mrs. Wilson, clearly unsure of his welcome after what had happened. Marcus walked over and greeted them warmly. "Hey Tommy, ready to learn more about bike maintenance?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically, finally relaxing. "Can I show the other kids what you taught me about the chain?" "That would be perfect," Marcus smiled. "You can be my assistant instructor for that lesson." As the workshop got underway, Marcus noticed something remarkable happening. Children who might never have interacted otherwise were working together, helping each other, and learning not just about bikes, but about friendship and community. Tommy proved to be an eager student and a natural teacher himself, proudly showing younger kids what he'd learned. Mrs. Wilson watched from the sidelines, occasionally wiping away tears. Near the end of the session, a commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. Richard Wilson stood there, still in his interview suit, his face unreadable. The room fell silent. Tommy froze mid-demonstration, his hand still on a bicycle chain. Mrs. Wilson stepped forward, ready to intervene, but before she could speak, Richard did something unexpected. He walked slowly into the room, looking around at the kids working on their bikes, at his son's grease-stained hands, at the community his prejudice had tried to divide but had ultimately helped bring together. The tension in the room was palpable as Richard approached Marcus. Everyone held their breath, wondering what would happen next. In that moment, as father and son faced each other, the workshop's true purpose hung in the balance. Would it be a place of healing, or would old prejudices prevail? The silence in the workshop seemed to stretch forever as Richard Wilson stood before Marcus. Everyone watched, waiting for what would happen next. Richard's face showed a complex mix of emotions: pride as he glanced at his son Tommy, shame as he looked at his wife, and something harder to read as he faced Marcus. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. I saw you on the news last night," he said, his voice rough. "Talking about this workshop." Marcus nodded but remained quiet, giving Richard space to continue. Tommy had edged closer to his mother, watching his father with worried eyes. "I didn't get that job today," Richard continued, looking down at his polished shoes, now dusty from the workshop floor. "The interviewer, he recognized me from that viral video. Said they couldn't hire someone with my attitudes." A few whispers rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Mrs. Wilson placed a protective hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Lost my last job because the factory closed," Richard went on, his voice growing strained. "Thought I'd lost this one because of you. Came here angry, ready to." He paused, took a deep breath. "But then I saw what you've done here. Saw my boy teaching other kids, proud of what he knows. Saw him being the kind of person I should have been." Marcus felt the tension in the room shift. This wasn't the confrontation everyone had expected. He noticed Mr. Harrison, the principal, quietly asking the news crews to lower their cameras, giving this moment the privacy it deserved. "I was wrong," Richard said finally, looking directly at Marcus. "About you. About a lot of things. Losing my job, it made me bitter. Made me look for someone to blame. But you," he gestured at the workshop. "You took something ugly and turned it into this." Tommy, gathering his courage, spoke up. "Dad, can I keep coming to the workshop? Marcus is teaching us really important stuff." Richard turned to his son, and for the first time in weeks, his face softened. "Yeah, buddy, you can come." He looked back at Marcus. "If that's okay." Marcus nodded, finding his voice. "Everyone's welcome here, Mr. Wilson. That's the whole point." "Call me Rich," he said, then hesitated before extending his hand. "And I'm sorry for everything." Marcus shook his hand, aware of the significance of this moment. Mrs. Wilson was crying openly now, and Tommy beamed with relief. "Maybe," Richard added, "you could use another volunteer. I'm pretty good with tools, and seems I've got some free time now." Before Marcus could respond, Mr. Patel, who had been restocking the snack table, stepped forward. "My brother owns auto repair shop across town, always looking for experienced mechanics. Perhaps we could talk after workshop." Richard blinked in surprise, clearly moved by this unexpected kindness. "I'd appreciate that," he managed to say. The tension broken, the workshop slowly returned to its normal buzz of activity. Tommy proudly showed his father what he'd learned, while Mrs. Wilson chatted with other parents, finally feeling welcome in their community. Later that afternoon, as Marcus watched Richard patiently explaining brake maintenance to a group of eager kids, his father's words about hearts changing one small step at a time echoed in his mind. The local news crews got their story, but not the one they'd expected. Instead of conflict, they captured the moment a community began to heal, when a father chose growth over prejudice, and when a simple bicycle repair workshop became something much more meaningful. As the day wound down, Marcus overheard Tommy telling his father, "See, Dad, I told you Marcus was a good person." Richard ruffled his son's hair, a gesture of affection that made Tommy grin. "Yeah, buddy, you did. Sometimes kids are a lot smarter than their parents." The workshop had succeeded beyond Marcus's expectations, not just in teaching bicycle repair, but in beginning to repair something far more important: the bonds between neighbors who had forgotten how to see each other as people first. 1 month after Richard Wilson's apology, the bicycle repair workshop had become a Saturday morning fixture in Pine Grove. The transformation went far beyond just fixing bikes. It sparked a genuine change in the community. Richard, now working full-time at Mr. Paddle's brother's auto shop, had become one of the workshop's most dedicated volunteers. His expertise with tools and engines complemented Marcus's teaching style perfectly. More surprisingly, the two had developed a genuine respect for each other. One Saturday morning, as Marcus arrived early to set up, he found Richard already there, looking troubled. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, setting down his backpack. Richard ran a hand through his graying hair. "Got some news yesterday. The factory where I used to work, they're reopening under new management, offering all former employees their jobs back with better pay." Marcus felt his heart sink. The auto shop job paid less than the factory position, but it had been crucial in Richard's journey to becoming a better person. "Are you thinking of going back?" "That's just it," Richard replied, adjusting a wrench on the workbench. "A month ago, I would have jumped at the chance. Better money, familiar work. But now," he gestured around the workshop. "This place, what we're doing here, it's changed me, changed how Tommy looks at me. I can't go back to being that angry man I was." Before Marcus could respond, Tommy burst into the workshop, followed by a group of younger kids. "Dad, Marcus, look who I brought." Behind Tommy stood three nervous-looking boys from the other side of town, their bikes in various states of disrepair. "Their dad works at the factory," Tommy explained. "I told them about our workshop." Richard and Marcus exchanged glances, both recognizing the significance of the moment. These were the children of Richard's former co-workers, families that had struggled just as his had when the factory closed. "Welcome to the workshop," Richard said warmly, kneeling to examine one of the bikes. "Looks like you've got a tricky gear problem here. Want to learn how to fix it?" As the morning progressed, more families arrived. Word had spread about the workshop's success, and now it wasn't uncommon to see people from all parts of town working together, sharing tools and stories. During the lunch break, Mr. Paddle arrived with his usual supply of snacks, but today he also brought news. "Richard," he called out, "my brother is very impressed with your work. He wants to make you head mechanic, start training program for young apprentices." The kids gathered around cheered, especially Tommy, who beamed with pride. Richard looked stunned. "But I've only been there a month." "He says you have gift," Mr. Patel continued. "Not just for fixing cars, but for teaching others. Says you remind him of himself when he first started." Marcus watched as Richard processed this information, seeing the moment he realized he found not just a job, but a calling. The angry man who had confronted Marcus in the convenience store parking lot was gone, replaced by someone who had learned to see beyond his prejudices. Later that afternoon, as they were cleaning up, Richard pulled Marcus aside. "I turned down the factory job," he said. "Called them this morning. Told them I'd found something better." "The auto shop?" Marcus asked. Richard shook his head. "Not just that. This," he gestured around the workshop. "What we're building here. It's bigger than fixing bikes or cars. It's about fixing relationships, building trust. I want to be part of that." As if to prove his point, the three boys from earlier approached Richard, asking if they could come back next week. Their father, they said, wanted to come too, to learn alongside them. Everyone's welcome here, Richard told them, catching Marcus's eye with a smile. That's the whole point. Watching them leave, Marcus realized that the workshop had become more than just a response to a single incident of prejudice. It had evolved into a place where barriers were broken down, where understanding grew alongside practical skills, and where the community could heal its old wounds. Tommy, packing up his tools, summarized it perfectly. You know what's cool? Now, when people see a broken bike, they don't just see a problem, they see a chance to help someone. Just like you did with me, Marcus. As autumn approached, the bicycle repair workshop had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a response to prejudice had blossomed into something remarkable. One crisp Saturday morning, Marcus arrived to find an unexpected surprise: a news crew from a national television network. They want to do a feature story, Mr. Harrison explained, meeting Marcus at the door, about how a simple act of kindness transformed an entire community. Inside, the workshop was buzzing with its usual weekend activity. Richard was demonstrating proper tire maintenance to a group of parents and children, while Tommy led his own small class on basic chain repair. The sight still amazed Marcus, how naturally Tommy had grown into his role as a young instructor. The reporter, Lisa Chen, approached Marcus with her microphone. "We've heard remarkable things about this workshop," she said. "Would you tell us how it all began?" Marcus glanced at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. "It started with a broken bike chain," Marcus began, "and a misconception that nearly tore our community apart." As Marcus shared the story, the cameras captured the workshop in action. They filmed children from different neighborhoods working together, former factory workers learning new skills alongside their kids, and Richard, now a respected mentor, teaching with patience and understanding. During a break in filming, Lisa pulled Marcus aside. "You know what's extraordinary," she said. "We've covered similar stories before, but they usually fade away. This is different. You've created something sustainable here." She was right. The workshop had evolved far beyond its original scope. Local businesses regularly donated supplies, and several participants had gone on to find jobs in mechanical fields. More importantly, the relationships built over broken bikes and shared tools had begun to heal old divisions in Pine Grove. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A group of Richard's former factory colleagues arrived, led by Mike Thompson, the union representative who had fought hardest against the factory's closing. "Heard what you built here," Mike said, looking around the workshop. "Some of us are starting a job training program for laid-off workers. Wondered if you'd be interested in partnering up." Richard stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. 2 months ago, these men had been bitter rivals. Now, they were reaching out with an olive branch. "We could expand the program," Marcus suggested. "Not just bikes, but basic auto repair, home maintenance. Teaching people to fix things instead of throwing them away," Richard added. "Just like this workshop taught me to fix my own broken thinking." As the adults discussed possibilities, Tommy approached Marcus with excitement. "Marcus, remember how you taught me to fix my bike that first day? Well, I just helped Jeremy fix the same problem on his bike. It feels really good to help someone else." Marcus watched as Tommy rushed back to help another young student. The boy who had once been afraid of his father's anger now radiated confidence and compassion. The news crew captured it all: the planning of the expanded program, the handshakes between former adversaries, and the continuous stream of learning and teaching happening throughout the workshop. Near the end of the day, Lisa asked for one final interview with both Marcus and Richard together. "If you could share one message from your experience, what would it be?" she asked. Richard spoke first. "Sometimes the things that seem broken beyond repair, whether it's a bike, a relationship, or a community, just need someone willing to take the time to fix them." Marcus nodded in agreement. "And sometimes the most important repairs aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones that happen in people's hearts." As the crew packed up their equipment, Tommy approached his father with a request. "Dad, can we go help fix Mrs. Rodriguez's fence tomorrow? She mentioned it's broken, and I thought maybe." Richard's eyes met Marcus's, both recognizing how far they'd all come. "Sure, buddy," Richard replied. "That's what our community does now. We fix things together." The workshop had started as a way to mend broken bikes, but it had become something far more powerful, a place where broken trust could be rebuilt, where prejudices could be dismantled, and where a community could learn that the most important repairs often start with the heart. 1 year after the incident that started it all, Pine Grove had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The bicycle repair workshop had grown into the Pine Grove Community Skills Center, occupying a renovated warehouse donated by a local business owner who had witnessed the change in his town. On the anniversary of that first confrontation, Marcus stood before a crowd gathered for the center's official opening ceremony. The audience included familiar faces: Richard and Tommy Wilson, Mr. Patel, Mrs. Rodriguez, and dozens of workshop participants, along with city officials and community leaders. A year ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his nerves. A broken bicycle chain brought out both the worst and best in our community. Today, we're not just fixing bikes anymore, we're building bridges. The center had expanded to include auto repair classes, woodworking workshops, and a youth mentorship program. Richard, now the head instructor for the automotive division, had helped dozens of former factory workers transition into new careers. Tommy, who had just turned 11, had started his own initiative within the center, a program where older kids taught younger ones basic repair skills. He called it Chain Reaction, inspired by the bicycle chain that had started everything. During the ceremony, Mayor Thompson stepped forward with an unexpected announcement. Pine Grove has been selected as a model city for community reconciliation, she declared. Representatives from other towns across the country will be visiting to learn from our experience. Richard took the podium next, something that would have seemed impossible a year ago. My son once needed help with his bike, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Instead of seeing someone trying to help him, I saw what my prejudice wanted me to see. But that day taught me that sometimes the thing that really needs fixing isn't what we think it is. After the speeches, as people mingled and explored the new facility, Marcus found Tommy sitting in the original workshop space, not just one part of the larger center. Feeling nostalgic? Marcus asked, sitting beside him. Tommy smiled. I was just thinking about that day. I was so scared when my chain broke, and then he showed up. Dad was so angry back then. He paused. Now he's different. Better. Happier. We're all different now, Marcus replied. That's what growth looks like. Just then, Richard appeared in the doorway. There you are. Come on, both of you. Someone just brought in a vintage bicycle that needs restoration. Thought you might want to work on it together. As they examined the old bicycle, other families began gathering around, asking questions and offering suggestions. The scene perfectly captured what the center had become, a place where knowledge was shared freely, where age and background didn't matter, and where every repair job was an opportunity to strengthen community bonds. Later that evening, as Marcus prepared to lock up, he found a small package on his workbench. Inside was a framed photograph of that first workshop day, showing him teaching Tommy about bicycle chains. A note attached read, "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest impact. Thank you for fixing more than just my bike. Tommy." Marcus hung the photo on the workshop wall, next to Tommy's original My Hero drawing. They served as reminders that change was possible, that communities could heal, and that sometimes the most important tools weren't the ones you could hold in your hands. As he turned off the lights, Marcus could see people still lingering in the parking lot, chatting and making plans for future projects. The center had become more than a building. It was a symbol of what could happen when people chose to repair relationships instead of burning bridges. The broken bicycle chain that had nearly divided their community had instead become the link that bound it together. And as Marcus watched Tommy and Richard walk to their car, laughing about something together, he knew that some repairs, once made, could last a lifetime. The legacy of that summer day would continue to ripple through Pine Grove, reminding everyone that the most powerful tools for changing the world were kindness, understanding, and the willingness to help fix what was broken, whether it was a bicycle, a relationship, or a community's heart.